With Burnice's banner returning to ZenlessZoneZero, there's one question on everyone's mind. Is she worth pulling for? She's changed a lot since her initial 1.2 release, and in addition to this, she's arguably one of the most versatile DPS that the game has ever released. So with this, today I'll be going over everything you need to know to make her as OP as possible. With that out of the way though, let's break down everything important about Burnice. Burnice's playstyle focuses on marking enemies with their scorch effect and managing her unique resource known as heat. When enemies are scorched, any squad member except Burnice can deal extra damage and anomaly to them, which works even when she's not on the field. To be clear though, this does come at the cost of her heat gauge. To make the most of her kit, she also then aims to repeatedly trigger afterburn on scorched targets. To do this, she needs to maintain her heat resource, which she can generate through her ultimate or by spending energy. This then creates a loop of scorch enemies, build and maintain heat with her EX special / ultimate, then swap off to another agent. Now as we move on to her kit, a reminder, this is an updated guide and I do have my previous video on Burnice, so if you're already familiar with Burnice's kit, feel free to skip this. That said, let's now break down Burnice's core passive and additional ability. Burnice's core passive is where we learn about the nitro fuel cocktail state. This is the main reason why Burnice is so strong and also a major part of her kit that you need to understand. Upon entering the battlefield for the first time, she instantly gains 100 heat, aka her unique resource. When Burnice spends energy, she also gains heat at a rate of 1.4 per energy up to her max of 100. Additionally, when she reaches at least 50 heat, she enters the nitro fuel cocktail state and remains in this form until all heat is used up. While in this state, Burnice also applies scorch to enemies when hitting them with her charged basic attack, her EX special attack, her chain attack, or her ultimate. To add to this, when squad members attack scorched enemies, it triggers afterburn using 8 heat to deal fire damage and build anomaly. This effect can only be triggered once every 1.5 seconds though. Additionally, for every 10 anomaly proficiency that Burnice has, afterburn damage increases by 1% up to a max of 30. On a side note, but also as something that's very important to know, afterburn is treated as assist attack damage. Let's now move on to her additional ability though. When another character in your squad is an anomaly agent or from the Sons of Caledon, Burnice gains 2 effects. First, when Burnice is charged basic attack, her EX special, or when the afterburn effect is triggered, the move's anomaly buildup increases by 65% because of her additional ability. The second effect is that when any squad member applies a burn to an enemy, the duration of said burn is increased by 3 seconds. Speaking of her attacks though, let's now explore her actual abilities. Burnice's basic attack combo is 5 attacks dealing physical and sometimes fire damage. However, what's more important here is that her charged basic attack, known as Mixed Flame Blend. While the attack itself is unimpressive, it gives Burnice access to a concept that we'll see repeated throughout the rest of her kit, and this is a shortcut to her double flamethrower attack. On that note, let's now talk about her special attack and this fancy shortcut that I just mentioned. To start, we'll pass over her non-energy using special attack because to be honest, it's rare and has no real use cases, and so let's begin with her EX special attack. The first version of this move is a one-handed flamethrower spray that deals fire damage, generates fire anomaly, reduces damage she takes while casting by 40%, grants her a slight anti-interrupt level increase, and finally allows her to cast a sidestep dodge if she inputs a move command against an attacking enemy. Long story short, this is an ability that deals damage and generates decent anomaly against an enemy, but it does have some evasive maneuvers. The second version of this move is a two-handed flamethrower spray and otherwise shares the same characteristics of the first, minus the ability to dodge. The skill also deals greater damage and increases fire anomaly against an enemy quicker since it's two-handed of course, but to summarize the importance of this skill, it's Burnice's best ability when it comes to spending energy so that she can gain heat. This isn't to undersell how important it is when it comes to her damage, as this is one of her highest DPS skills as well that also deals anomalies quickly too. These two factors are very valuable for anomaly and disorder based teams, but what's equally as important to know here is that Burnice can only access the skill if she uses her first EX special attack beforehand. With this, it's time we readdress the shortcuts for Burnice. As recently mentioned, Burnice's two-handed flamethrower attack is much more valuable than her one-handed version, and so doing anything or using any method that will allow her to use this attack instead of her one-handed spray is a high priority. Because of this, Burnice performing a charged basic attack and then having access to her double shot immediately afterward is amazing. On that note, let's now talk about her assist abilities, as there are shortcuts that are present here too. Burnice's quick assist is honestly pretty worthless as she doesn't gain much from dealing a minor amount of fire or physical damage, but her defensive assist and its follow-up attack are actually incredibly valuable, as the follow-up attack itself allows Burnice to also begin using her two-handed flamethrower attack like with her charged basic attack as we mentioned earlier. Burnice's dodge abilities are pretty niche and aren't used much as she prefers to stay off field for the most most part, but now we have her chain attack. Since it's been asked a few times prior, this is another character that you could potentially use the chain attack cancel trick on, as Burnice's chain attacks fill her anomaly bar quite quickly. However, depending on the team composition, goal, or boss being challenged, this could be worse value than using it on another agent like Jane, or avoiding this entirely. Now finally, we have Burnice's ultimate. This is definitely what made me the most interested in Burnice when she first launched in 1.2, as she was the first character who was marketed to be able to use their ultimate while not on field. Since then, it has remained one of the better ultimates, especially after the rework to decibels and ultimates in 1.4. Applying fire anomaly, refilling Burnice's heat bar to full, and allowing another ally to quick assist onto field is very helpful, and since the game no longer restricts you to one ultimate per team, this is an incredibly unique utility and damage dealing skill they should definitely prioritize using when it's available. In terms of skill upgrades, Burnice gains the most value from upgrading her core passive and EX special, but following this, upgrading her chain, basic, and assist at roughly equal levels is fine too. The last and arguably least used ability from Burnice's kit is her dodge related skills, so upgrading this last is fine as well. Now despite upgrading these skills, however, it is worth mentioning that leveling these abilities won't have nearly the same impact as it would on attack or crit based characters. This is because most of Burnice's DPS output, like other anomaly based agents, comes from the anomaly effect, not from the base damage on the abilities themselves. Side note, leveling these abilities only roughly increase your overall DPS by about 20 to 30%, so just keep that in mind when you're investing in your characters. Because Burnice prefers to stay off field, her combos are therefore designed to support this playstyle. Before that though, let's talk about the things that you'll need to manage while playing Burnice. First, since she only enters the nitro fuel cocktail state after 50 heat, getting to this and staying in this enhanced form for as long as possible is important. Next, once she enters this state, making sure to apply her scorch effect is also a priority so that she can begin applying afterburn effects. Finally, while there are ways to optimize and speed up Burnice's two-handed flamethrower shot, the key focus here is using it to fill both her heat bar and the enemy's anomaly gauge, regardless if you're doing it by pressing her EX special twice or if you're using one of the shortcuts that I mentioned earlier. With this though, now let's move to her two combos. The first is for bosses who are more aggressive and swing early. First, start with another agent on field who isn't Burnice, perform a defensive assist with the character that then leads you to Burnice, continue with the follow-up attack, use her EX special attack, which is now shortcutted to be her two-handed version, wait until the special attack fills up the enemy's anomaly or Burnice's heat gauge, then end this by assisting off to another agent / manually swapping instead. Burnice by this point should then have roughly 13 afterburn effects that she can apply against her enemies. Once she runs out of heat though, she can then be swapped back onto field to repeat the cycle. The second combo, though different, is more like a variation of the first. The main difference here comes in the form of assists and whether you choose to use them or not. Instead of relying on assists for the two-handed version of her flamethrower, this combo uses a quick press of her first EX special, releasing it and immediately following this with another EX special to get into the two-handed form. The end of the sequence is a manual swap to another agent, as this combo is designed to avoid assists entirely or needing to account for enemy behavior. Now when it comes to Burnice's W engine choices, she now has a new fantastic option as of 1.6, with new agents being released since her initial banner. To be specific though, I am referring to Yanagi's W engine, Time Weaver, which actually has an insanely powerful passive. Now before I go further, I do want to talk about the bug associated with this W engine. Now as you might have seen in a previous video I made covering this, the first part of Yanagi's W engine passive provides 30 scaling to 50% anomaly buildup rate depending on how many copies you have. However, despite this post being months old at this point, the quote-unquote bug still hasn't been fixed nor addressed. While the implications of this or that can be its own video, what's important to take away from this is that the W engine in its current state is absolutely amazing on Burnice. To be clear, even if the anomaly buildup wasn't usable on Burnice, this W engine would still be an amazing option for her. Between the increased anomaly proficiency and the buff to disorder damage with this passive effect active on her, it's by far one of the best options you could choose to equip on Burnice. Moving to her other options though, let's talk about her signature. While this is definitely one of her best choices, this W engine can suffer at times if the duration of the fight is shorter. Additionally, the energy regen on this W engine can be less useful post 1.4, especially compared to the extra disorder damage and increased anomaly proficiency that you'd otherwise get from Time Weaver. That said, compared to other W engines like Electro Lip Gloss, Gemini, or Rainforest Gourmet, there is roughly a 20% difference between her best options and these free-to-play engines. Regarding these free-to-play choices though, it should be known that certain options will function better depending on the encounter. For a W engine like Weeping Gemini for instance, fighting against multiple enemies will cause the performance of this option to to suffer. However, if you decide to use this W engine in something like Deadly Assault, it will perform much better. With this, the recommendation that I would have for those looking to play Burnice is Time Weaver if you can deal with the loss of energy regen and maintain all of her buffs, Burnice's Signature if you want more casual yet still high performance experience, and Weeping Gemini if you don't have any of the above. Side note, you could also swap from Gemini to Rainforest to Lip Gloss depending on the levels and what fight you're encountering, but at the end of the day, you should just choose what you have leveled. But of course, this depends heavily on your team, whether the fight has multiple enemies in it, and also of course your teammates. Now, since her release, Burnice's build hasn't changed too much, but with 1.6, Zenless did add Phaethon's Melody, a new disk drive set that complements Burnice extremely well. Now, for transparency, this isn't Burnice's new best 4-piece set, but rather her preferred 2-piece set, as there are very limited sources of gaining Anomaly Mastery in this game. Further proof of this is the fact that no other sets or substat roles can provide this stat otherwise, with the only exception being Freedom Blues, which is its own special case. In terms of her best 4-piece set though, Chaos Jazz is by far her best choice, as it synergizes perfectly with her playstyle. The added fire damage and her increased damage percent while off field was specifically designed with Burnice in mind, so it makes sense that this set performs best on Burnice especially. Let's move on to stats now though. Given Burnice's role as an anomaly agent, she prefers 2 stats specifically: anomaly proficiency and attack percent. These will therefore be the 2 stats she aims to have the most of, and it's also reflected through her ideal main stats. Her best 4th slot is anomaly proficiency, but her 5th and 6th slot are more dependent on team composition, Mindscape, and W engine choice. Big surprise here. Overall, if using someone like Astra alongside a Burnice with her 2nd Mindscape, you can expect 10% to outperform element damage percent by a decent margin. However, if you're missing Burnice's Signature and are just using a free-to-play W engine like Rainforest Gourmet, damage percent can definitely still perform well. For her 6th slot, Anomaly Mastery is amazing since Anomaly application speed directly affects Anomaly agent's damage output, but in some cases where extra Anomaly speed isn't as relevant, attack percent can also be very competitive too. With all this, I now have a sample stat line alongside some recommendations for Burnice's disk drive set and her main stats. Burnice should be aiming for 3000 attack, 375 anomaly proficiency if using Yanagi's Time Weaver, and 162 anomaly mastery if you use Phaethon's Melody. And with the stat line, the main stats that you're looking for are 4th slot anomaly proficiency, 5th slot fire damage, and 6th slot anomaly mastery. As a reminder though, the encounter, your team, and whether the anomaly mastery will make a difference are all contributing factors that can cause your main stat to change to something like pen ratio and attack percent, so make sure to do some testing before you decide on a build to stay with. Burnice's Mindscapes are actually pretty interesting, so let's break down each one. Her first Mindscape is more like a quality of life buff, with it increasing the overall heat she can contain. In addition to this, the Mindscape also buffs the anomaly buildup and damage of afterburn effects. Overall, this is a good but not game-changing Mindscape. The added heat doesn't add as much value as you'd think, as most of the time using up 100 heat is pretty rare, and otherwise the stats are nice but definitely not broken. Her second Mindscape comes with added pen ratio to the team, and it also changes Burnice's preferred 5th main stat. In terms of damage, this is actually one of the highest DPS gains that Burnice has in terms of her Mindscapes, with it giving her roughly a 10 to 15% damage increase. Burnice's 4th Mindscape is pretty unique, as this is primarily geared towards players who want to build Burnice with crit. The 30% increased crit rate on EX special attack, alongside the slight increase to the flamethrower's duration, makes sense and is also very synergistic should you choose to invest in crit Burnice. But on that topic, let me now address crit Burnice and this playstyle now. To be clear, during Burnice's 1.2 release and pre-Evelyn, Burnice had slight reason and theory to be built with crit, since pairing her with Soldier let her focus on a crit-based afterburn build. But once other teams and characters like Yanagi, Miyabi, and Evelyn were released, it was clear that crit Burnice was more of a niche, funny build than a high-performing meta one. To be clear, it is still possible to complete content and beat endgame bosses even if you choose to play Burnice with a crit-oriented build, but because of the way that Burnice's kit functions, having this fantasy of staying on field and using her flamethrowers specifically to one-shot everything is less realistic and definitely tied more so to her Mindscapes. Now, despite everything I've said about crit Burnice, her 6th Mindscape actually does help crit Burnice enjoyers, since her EX special attack gains even more priority and her afterburns are granted even more damage. Now, though this is a lot of text, the summary of this Mindscape is that using her EX special will grant Burnice even more damage, and it's actually enough to justify using her EX special's flamethrower as a core damage dealing ability. For context, Burnice's EX special attack at Mindscapes 0 is useful and primarily used for generating anomaly or heat, but definitely not so much for one-shotting enemies with the flames themselves. Now, unfortunately, I haven't made a Burnice specific teams video testing every variation. I did spend the past few weeks seeing how strong each variation of Burnice's teams are. The results I found were expected in most cases, but there were actually a few shocking findings that I had for other tests. Let me explain. First and foremost, the highest performing teams for her were Miyabi Burnice Astra, Burnice Yanagi Astra, and Jane Burnice Astra. If these teams sounded familiar to you, it's probably because they are some of the most common teams used to clear content like Shield Defense or Deadly Assault. And to be honest, what could even be surprising about these results? They're all S-rank limited agents after all. However, Jane is actually only equal if not slightly better than Piper in most cases for this exact same team composition. In fact, they yield very similar results in most cases, especially if you're comparing an M6 Piper to a M0 Jane. This wasn't the only interesting conclusion that I came to though. Prior to my testing, I, like many of you, was a firm believer that Miyabi Yanagi was easily the best team composition for all content in the game. However, after extensive testing and trialing of Miyabi Burnice, I actually found that Burnice was better in many cases than Yanagi in terms of clear speed. Now, before you come to the conclusion that Yanagi is bad or that Miyabi Yanagi is terrible, which would be insane to say by the way, there are some observations that I made about this team pairing that led me to this conclusion. First, Miyabi Burnice did not outperform Miyabi Yanagi in every piece of content. In fact, the team was definitely competitive if not better than Miyabi Burnice in most Deadly Assault fights, unless the content had an unfair advantage like fire weakness for Burnice or electric resistance when using Yanagi. This was the case for most if not all Deadly Assault bosses where there weren't unfair advantages, and that led me to realize that the length of the boss fight played a major factor in whether Yanagi or Burnice performed better. For fights where bosses were beaten in short periods of time like with Shield Defense, Burnice was the clear winner since she applied Afterburn and Fire Anomaly very quickly. This paired well with Miyabi's desire to stay on field, dealing massive DPS. By contrast, Yanagi's early anomaly application was much slower and visibly worse than Burnice's, making Miyabi's synergy with her suffer when used in similar length fights. Despite this though, if Yanagi was taken to one of the Deadly Assault bosses, she was much more competitive and dealt impressive numbers across most bosses that she encountered, regardless of the buff. Another detail worth mentioning here is that Deadly Assault also fixates on team management, as 3 unique teams are required to complete this content. Because of this, regardless of the results that I had earlier, using Burnice for a Miyabi team could actually harm an account, as it could prevent a user from using a powerful Jane Burnice team to clear a later stage, making this even less recommended or viable. Overall though, while Miyabi Burnice, Burnice Yanagi, and Piper/Jane Burnice were all powerful combos, it is worth knowing that many other teams simply paired with Burnice gained massive value. In almost any team, Burnice's addition as a secondary DPS significantly improved clear times because of her anomaly application and overall damage. To further this point, when I used Burnice in place of Kaleda or Lighter for a Soldier 11 team, Burnice ended up performing much better than expected, completely blazed past Kaleda in terms of clear speed, and was only slightly worse, if not sometimes equal to Lighter in terms of clear speed. Finally though, we return to a question as old as time: should you actually pull for Burnice? Now, this is a question that has a lot of nuance and factors to it, so I offer you the following to consider when deciding on whether or not you should get Burnice. First, Burnice is the only character as of 1.6 that can apply anomalies while off field. Second, she's part of one of the highest DPS teams in the game, while also being one of the most versatile agents at the same time. Third, the newest character Vivian is an ether anomaly character whose kit we aren't sure about, but could definitely have a future with Burnice depending on her abilities. Fourth, characters like Jane and Piper almost feel required to have Burnice in order to be competitive in the late game of ZenlessZoneZero because of how well Burnice synergizes with them, so if you are going to play any of these characters, she's definitely a character worth considering. And finally, Burnice is one of the most colorful and personality-filled characters in the game, so if you want to pull for her because you like her a lot, feel free to do so. As always though guys, whether you choose to pull or skip Burnice is completely up to you, as I am just giving advice, but for me personally, her impact and versatility makes ZenlessZoneZero infinitely easier. Therefore, at the end of the day, I would actually pull for her. That's going to be it for today's video though guys. Thank you again for watching. I hope you learned something, hope you enjoyed. If you did, I'd appreciate it if you check out the rest of my socials, leave a like, comment, turn on the notification bell, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.